This is a model comparison between the Muddox Vengeance, XL, and Fort Mac. One of the most common questions we get on the phone is what's the difference between these three models? And the reason why people ask that is because from the outside, our machines pretty much look the same. They've got the same upper, lower body, tires, wheels, that kind of thing. The Fort Mac is pretty distinguishable from the outside because it always has tracks and it always has the radiator and the exhaust up top. So what are the differences in these three machines? Well, really it all lies inside the drivetrain. So first up is the Muddox Vengeance. This is our entry-level machine. This is more compared to a traditional amphibious ATV where it is a skid steer drive vehicle. Then the XL is hydrostatic drive, and so is the Fort Mac. All three of these vehicles are fully amphibious. The Vengeance right here has a brush guard, twin roll bar package, and rear winch. The XL in the middle has no options on it. And the Fort Mac, again, they come standard with tracks, but this particular unit has the beaver dam tracks, which are by far the nastiest ones that we offer. Extremely aggressive tread, and it also has a brush guard. I'm going to start with the entry-level Muddox Vengeance. Now, to get a better understanding of how each one operates differently, we really need to dive into the mechanical aspect of each machine. This particular model, the Vengeance, is a T20 skid steer transmission setup, and these use a lawn and garden style engine. Right now we have Briggs & Stratton engines all the way up to 40 horsepower. We also offer a Kawasaki liquid cooled and a Kubota diesel engine. That gives everyone the variety of air versus liquid cooled and gas versus diesel. Now the Vengeance uses a very similar setup to a snowmobile where it has CVT clutches on it. Here's a closer look at the CVT clutch system. You'll notice that this engine clutch is spinning, which drives that belt to the transmission. And it also spins the alternator if you have an alternator kit. Up here we can see the clutch spinning the transmission as well. Once power is spun through the transmission, it goes to what we call a jack shaft, and this is just simply to add gear reduction before it hits the axles. So there is drivetrain that goes to the jack shaft, and then from the jack shaft on the outside you have chains that go to each individual axle, and you have chains all the way down the entire machine. So these two share one chain, those two share a chain, and then those two share a chain. It looks like a single unit, however, it's really more like two transmissions inside of one case where they meet together in the seam in the center right here. So what this allows us to do is to have full total control over the vehicle. You've got the left stick that controls the left side wheels, the right stick controls the right side wheels. Inside the T20 transmission there are large drums which are circular and then bands that wrap all the way around them. Once you push the stick forward, it clamps the bands around that drum and it gives you power. And you can see when I move this lever, we're actually moving the linkage right down on the transmission. Imagine in the middle of the stroke of this lever, because it goes back and it goes forward. Right here at the center is very comparable to a clutch in a standard automobile transmission. Right now you have the clutch pedal pushed all the way inwards on your vehicle. When you let out the clutch, you know that the vehicle starts to move. On a Vengeance, once you start pushing forward on the sticks, those bands engage on that drum and you gain traction inside the transmission. It starts moving all these chains. Now once those sticks are forward and engaged, you control your speed with the throttle. So more throttle is faster, less throttle is slower. So when you're in forward gear, you push it forward and it starts to move forward. Now when you're in forward gear and you pull back, This applies the braking side of the bands, and that's how you lock up the wheels to make a turn. Because to make a turn in the Vengeance, you apply brakes to one side of the wheels and you power the other side, so then it spins it right around. So the reason these sticks are pushed forward is because we've actually installed springs on the transmission that load them forward, because what we find is that customers that are new to the machine, they don't push the sticks all the way forward, they're more about right here, and they start slipping the bands inside that transmission. So again, it's very, very similar to a clutch in a car. Now when the transmission is shifted in reverse, everything is opposite. You actually pull backwards on the sticks to drive it backwards, and you push them forward to apply brakes. As it's two transmissions in one case, we actually have two different shift levers right here. So yes, you do have to shift the transmission from forward into reverse. The reason why we have two levers is it allows people to put both levers forward to drive the machine forward, put them in reverse to drive both of it in reverse. However, what you can do is shift one side into forward, one side into reverse. To do that, you apply the company lever forward, then the other one backwards. So with those sticks pushed in opposite directions, you can counter-rotate the machine within its own circle. When you're going to logs, you almost blip the throttle because you want to have a little bit of power to get up over the log, and the unit will actually kind of hop over and then back down the other side. Say you're climbing up a hill, you have to drive up the hill by pulling the throttle right here. Then when you're going down the hill, you apply brakes and you're braking down the hill. And because the Vengeance has standard axles and chains, you have to maintain these parts. The number one killer of amphibious ATVs is letting this machine sit outside, filling up with rainwater, or you take it to an off-road park, you let mud fly inside of it, and you just leave it there, because you need to think of these chains as an external transmission, in a sense. And if you let water build up and mud, they start rusting the chains don't move as well anymore, they wear out much faster. It's just no good. Then another thing is that the axles have bearings on them. So there's a bearing on the inside right here, and the Vengeance has one bearing on the outside of the body right here. The XLs all have a third bearing that sits right about here. When you own a Vengeance, you need to make sure you keep those bearings greased, especially these outside, because that is essentially a seal when you're in water. Because if you don't grease those bearings, water can eventually seep in on the inside of the machine. So as long as you keep the Vengeance bearings greased, the chains maintained and greased, drive it very nicely, it will last a long time. If you decide to not do maintenance, that's where problems kind of get in hand. To combat the issue of maintaining an amphibious ATV, we've actually developed a remote grease setup. So with this setup right here, you can see one on the inside, and then you can see one on the left side of the machine on the back, one on the right side of the back. So you go to every individual axle bearing inside the unit, and they bring all the lines to a centralized location. So all you have to do is pop off your engine cover, get your grease gun, and grease each one of the bearings right there, and then the outer bearings, which are on the back right here. Because if you don't have this setup, decades past, people have had to pull all the floorboards out and get a grease gun to every single bearing, and sometimes they're not that easy to get to. So with the remote grease setup, that really helps and makes maintaining the machine very easy. Now if you don't want to do that, we also have an electronic controlled greasing system where it's all push button on the dash, a computer does it all for you, and it also greases the chains. With the chains, you have to make sure that they have proper adjustment because you don't want too much slack up and down, but you don't want them too tight either. So we've got adjusters for every single chain. And the nice thing about our machine is that we make these very easy to maintain because we ride them just like you guys do. We've grown up around them, been to all over the off-road parks. I mean, we've seen everything. And obviously we've had to work on a lot of machines too. So we want to make it as easy as possible for everybody. So even our chain adjusters are very easy. All you have to do is loosen the jam nut down here, and then you twist this either left or right depending which way you need to adjust the tensioner, up for tighter, down for looser on the back. Set the jam nut, you're done. You can adjust all the chains in a Modox in probably about 20 minutes. As it's a CVT clutch setup, you do have to replace the belt every once in a while. Because it is a transmission setup, there's a little bit extra chains that you need to maintain, such as the jack shaft chains right up here. Over time, as those bands slip inside the transmission, you do have to readjust the linkage down here to account for different tolerances, and then years down the road, yes, you will have to rebuild the transmission. So overall, the Vengeance is a great unit. It is our lowest cost option, but it is the highest maintenance machine. The XL is a hydrostatic setup, and what this does is we've got a little bit bigger engine than the Vengeance. This is a 57 horsepower Kubota gas engine, and this is the only engine that we currently offer in the XL. But this engine is directly mounted to a hydraulic pump setup. There's nothing to maintain between the engine and the pump. So what this pump does is it pushes fluid to two hydraulic motors. You can see right underneath the pump there's a motor for the left side and a motor for the right side. Each motor drives each side of the machine. So you see this left motor still has chains that go down to all the axles. The XL setup is very, very simple to drive. There's really not much explanation even needed on this. You've got your left lever for the left side of the wheels, the right for the right. Now the XL, you notice, does not have a throttle on the control lever. The throttle is all done right here. So you set the RPM. This particular unit has a digital screen. It gives you all kinds of good information. So you set the throttle and display it right on the computer. And once you have your throttle set, you do all your control with the sticks. You don't have to worry about the throttle at all. So with the hydraulic setup, there is no need to shift. So you get inside the unit and you simply push forward to drive forward, and you pull backwards to drive backwards. You can kind of see what's going on right here when you move the stick. It moves the components right on top of that pump. That is all the linkage that there is in the XL. The benefit of having a hydraulic setup is that you have total precision control. You can just barely nudge this stick and the machine will just creep forward, barely nudge this one, and then you're barely creeping into a turn. To counter rotate, you push one lever forward, one lever backwards, and you're instantly spinning within its own radius. the nice thing about the XL is that you drive up the hill by pulling this forward, but you also drive down the hill. Because there are no brakes in a sense in hydraulic setup, there's only forward and backwards, you're always controlling the machine. Think of this as a zero-turn lawnmower. We do offer an optional steering wheel setup for the XL 57 horsepower and the Fort Mac. As you can see, you got a traditional steering wheel just like a normal automobile with a gas and a brake pedal. This is a 2-speed system. We have a low range and a high range, and then you set your throttle on the dash, you push it up to bump it up, down to bump it down, just like an XL 57 or Fort Mac. We've got the low range program set up to where if you turn the steering wheel to the left, it drives like a skid steer vehicle, meaning it brakes one side, drives the opposite. Now if you turn it all the way until it stops, about right there, it actually counter rotates, meaning one side goes backwards, one side wheels go forward. Now what we've done is when you put it in high range, it disables that counter rotation feature when the wheel is at full lock, because you don't want to be driving at high speeds, yank the wheel all the way, and then put it into a counter rotation. Another really neat feature about the steering wheel is that the steering wheel does absolutely nothing if you're not pressing the gas pedal. This is for use with rental field companies because you don't want someone getting out of the machine while it's running, grabbing the steering wheel for support, and then the machine taking off on them. So the steering wheel is a dead man without the gas pedal pressed. And I'll go ahead and I'll demonstrate that for you. Pull the parking brake up, so flash on the dash. So bump our throttle up a little bit. We'll put it into forward, and look at this. It doesn't move anywhere. We'll go ahead, we'll put it in low range. Now you notice when I press the gas pedal, it starts to move, and then the steering wheel works. So, if you turn it partial way, you just get a little bit of counter rotation. All the way you get a lot of counter rotation. Now if we put it into high range, we go to make the same maneuver. It's just skid steering those tires. So that's how that works. Like I mentioned before, there is a third bearing on the Mudox XL right here that adds a third bearing right about there just for extra support. With all that being said, you have less maintenance on the XL versus the Vengeance because you have no transmission to maintain. All you have to really maintain are the chains right here, the axle bearings, and then change your fluid in there every once in a while. Because the XL is a hydrostatic setup, it's a lot heavier duty than the Vengeance. Whereas the Vengeance is a more recreational, light commercial, the XL can be used commercially because it's just got so much more power thanks to hydraulics. And the benefit of owning an XL if you're a company is less maintenance saves more money in the long run. In the long run, the XL will have less maintenance required than the Vengeance. The last machine we're going to talk about today is the Muddox Fort Mac. This is our biggest, baddest machine that we build. And all those early machines were getting sent up to the Canadian oil fields, and of course, if it was possible to break it, they were going to break it. And we built our machines tougher and tougher and tougher over time, and then we ended up what we call the Fort Mac, which is short for Fort McMurray, which is where those oil fields were. The Fort Mac is very similar in the way that the XL is set up, where we only offer one engine option, and at this time it's an 85 horsepower Ford EFI engine. And then we have the exhaust and the radiator up top just to help with space inside the engine compartment and cooling. And the engine is directly driving a hydraulic pump just like the XL does, and you can see that right here. Now, whereas the XL, you look inside, you see one hydraulic motor on each end. We don't have that in the Fort Mac. What we have are motors directly on the wheels. So you'll see one motor here, one there, and then in the back of the unit, we have a motor back here and a motor right here. So each four corners of the Fort Mac are powered. If you look at the wheels on the outside, you can see that these don't have anything on the ends, whereas the center two have very similar to a trailer axle hub, because these are free spinning wheels. These are not powered on the center. This is exactly how a tank is set up, where the outer wheels are driving the track while the centers are just idlers for the track. The disadvantages of the Fort Mac, although it's our biggest, baddest machine, you do have the exhaust and the radiator up top. Because the engine is so large, we have an engine cover that sticks a little bit more into the passenger compartment. It's about right here, so you do lose a little bit of space in the back. And as the center wheels are idlers, you always have to run tracks on the machine. Just like the XL, there is no throttle on the levers. This particular setup has a twist throttle. You set that on the dash, and of course, just like the XL, this one has a nice little fancy screen. And it's also got a check engine light that flashes different codes at you. The Fort Mac's got a 2-speed hydraulic setup. You've got a low range and a high range. With the lack of chains in the Fort Mac, there really isn't much maintenance involved in this machine, which was the entire purpose of building it. You have to grease your hubs every once in a while, and then once you go to the inside, there are no axle bearings, there are no chains. There's really not a whole lot of maintenance aside from oil changes. So this machine is designed to run almost around the clock without having to stop to do any maintenance on the unit. So whereas the Vengeance is the least expensive to purchase but the most maintenance, the XL is a little bit more expensive with less maintenance. Then the Fort Mac is our most expensive unit, but almost no maintenance involved, just very, very little. And over time, as a corporation, especially utility companies and oil fields, and if you schedule all the maintenance procedures throughout the vehicle's lifetime, the Fort Mac is cheaper to own in the long run. Hope you guys enjoyed the video. If you're looking for more information, you can check out our website at www.mudox.net. We also have quite a few cool videos on our YouTube channel. And be sure to check out our Facebook page and Instagram for latest updates.